She was already standing in my backyard, heels sinking into the dirt, pointing at my half-dug pool with a rolled-up copy of the HOA bylaws like it was a murder weapon. "This stops now, Mike. We already have a pool. You don't get to build your own." I bought this house for the yard. That's the truth. Some people get pulled in by crown molding or vaulted ceilings or whatever the hell a chef's kitchen is supposed to be. Me? I saw the backyard and instantly pictured a grill, a hammock, maybe a little garden, and, eventually, a pool. Not a plastic kiddie thing from Costco, but a real, built-into-the-ground, cannonball-friendly swimming pool, something that felt earned. Back when Tina and I first moved in, we didn't have much. I had just started my landscaping business, Mike's Yard Works, not exactly catchy, but straight to the point, and she was juggling substitute teaching gigs while trying to get on full-time. We were tired, stretched thin, but hopeful. Jake was 9 then. Wild mop of hair, always barefoot, always covered in dirt like he'd just been raised by wolves. That backyard became his personal jungle. He'd climb trees, dig random holes looking for treasure, hose himself down like a lunatic. It became kind of our family thing, backyard Saturdays. As the business picked up, life got a little easier. I started hiring help, Tina landed a solid teaching position at the middle school, and Jake, well, that kid found his obsession. Water polo. Now, if you've never seen a water polo game, imagine soccer but in deep water, and everyone's trying to drown each other politely. It's brutal. But Jake, he was all in. Every evening, he'd beg us to take him to the HOA pool so he could practice throws, tread water, work on drills. The problem? That damn pool was always packed. I'm talking screaming toddlers, floating diapers, and those teenagers who don't swim so much as loiter in chlorinated filth. Jake tried his best. Bless him, but between the lifeguards constantly yelling no roughhousing and the hours being cut for maintenance, the poor kid barely got a proper workout in. Tina and I started looking at private gyms, even city rec centers, but they were either booked solid or had fees that made your eyes bleed. That's when the idea started forming, not just as a casual dream, but as a plan. A real pool, right in our own backyard. No schedules, no rules, no half-broken showers. Just Jake, water, and enough space to throw a ball without knocking over some toddler with floaties. But before I even thought about calling a contractor, I did my homework. I pulled out the HOA bylaws and scoured every line like I was reading a ransom note. I'm not some idiot who just starts pouring concrete and dares the neighborhood to stop me. The rule was simple, no structures visible from the street without approval. But if it was in the backyard, below fence height, and within property lines, free game. Still, I wasn't taking chances. I paid a real estate attorney, old buddy of mine from college named Levinson, to double-check everything. His exact words, "You're golden. As long as it's not sticking up like a diving board into your neighbor's window, you're good." That was all I needed. It took a while to save up. I wasn't going to dip into our emergency fund or start cutting corners with work. So I picked up some extra landscaping gigs, did some design consulting on the side, even built a koi pond for this retired dentist who talked to his fish. All that so I could pay for the pool in cash. No loans, no debt, just honest sweat. Jake turned 15 this year. His coach pulled me aside after a game and said, "Your kid's got something. He's raw, but if he can get consistent practice, real time in the water, he could have a shot at playing in college." And that's when I knew I was doing the right thing. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about giving my son a shot, a real one. The kind of shot I never had. I didn't grow up with backyard pools or club teams or fancy gear. My parents were the hose in the front yard and don't complain kind of folks. Jake deserved more. He was working hard, doing well in school, respectful. Hell, he even washed the dishes without being asked. So yeah, I started digging. Rented a backhoe, called in a buddy for the concrete, mapped everything out myself. I had the permits, I had the plans, I had the approval from the city. Everything was lined up like a perfect row of dominoes. And then, Karen happened. I swear she's like a mosquito that smells homeowner happiness from a mile away. I'd barely broken ground when she made her grand entrance. Pencil skirt, sensible heels, and that damn binder of doom. That's where things really started to go sideways. But trust me, none of that would have mattered if it weren't for the pool. That pool was everything. It was hope, freedom, legacy. It was a big, concrete middle finger to every closed gate Jake had ever run into at the HOA center. So number, I wasn't about to fill it in just because Karen said so. She didn't know who she was messing with. Not yet. So get this. I'm standing there in the backyard, sun on my neck, dirt on my jeans, just kind of admiring the hole in the ground like it's the Grand Canyon I personally summoned into existence, when I hear the unmistakable click-click of someone walking across gravel in heels. Nobody in their right mind wears heels into a construction zone unless they're trying to make a point. I turn, and there she is. Karen Whitmore, the president of our beloved HOA, beige blouse buttoned up to her throat, a tight little smile that didn't touch her eyes, and that infamous black binder clutched like a damn Bible. She doesn't say hi, doesn't ask how the family's doing. She just points her chin toward the pit like she's expecting me to say something first. You didn't submit a project modification request. No, good morning. No, wow, that looks like a lot of work. Nothing, just that. Like I'd set fire to the gazebo or started building a meth lab next to my tomato plants. Now, I'm not proud of this, but I laughed. Out loud. Which I'll admit was probably not the most diplomatic move, but come on. This woman once reported a guy for non-regulation garden gnomes. I figured she was just fishing. I told her calmly that I'd checked the bylaws and the pool didn't fall under anything that required HOA approval. Backyard only, flush with the ground, not visible from the street. I even had the papers if she wanted to look. Karen gave me this look, like I'd farted in church. That's not how we interpret it, she said, with a little tilt of her head. I asked her, again, still pretty friendly at this point, who exactly we was, because last I checked, the HOA board hadn't met in months. She smiled wider. Well, I am the board until we reconvene. And I swear, I could feel something shift right there in that moment, like that was the first crack of thunder before a long, messy storm. Then she handed me a printed letter, dated, signed only by her, with no board vote, no formal meeting, and it said, in that passive-aggressive HOA tone, that my project was in clear violation of Section 4C pertaining to structural uniformity and community usage redundancy. I had to read that sentence 3 times. Community usage redundancy? I asked her what the hell that meant, and she said, without blinking, we already have a community pool. There's no reason for you to build a private one. I thought she was joking. I really did. But she just stood there, waiting for me to nod and say, oh, okay, Karen, thanks for the clarification. I'll go grab the cement and fill this in now. That was the moment I realized she wasn't playing by any book I could read. This wasn't about regulations. This wasn't even about the pool. This was about control. She turned on her heel and walked off, binder tucked under her arm like she'd just delivered the 10 Commandments. I watched her leave, and for the first time since I started digging that hole, I felt something I hadn't expected. Unease. It wasn't full-blown anger yet, more like that itch between your shoulder blades when you know someone's watching you and pretending they're not, like the air itself got colder. That little letter? It didn't have legal weight, I knew that. No seal, no attorney's signature, no nothing. But it was the first shot, and I could feel it in my gut. This wasn't going to be the end of it. Karen had thrown down the gauntlet, and the worst part? She didn't even break a sweat doing it. A couple days after our lovely interaction in the backyard, I came home from a job and noticed a bright orange tag zip-tied to my front gate. Big bold letters, stop work notice. Looked official, except it wasn't from the city, it was from the HOA. And I don't mean the whole board, I mean Karen. Her name was literally printed in Comic Sans at the bottom, which I think is the legal font of passive-aggressive warfare. Now, I knew the HOA didn't have legal jurisdiction to issue stop work orders on private property, especially not without a vote, not without due process. But that bright orange tag did exactly what it was supposed to. It made the neighbors look, made them whisper, and that's when it started. Next day, 2 guys from the city show up, city code enforcement. Friendly enough until they start asking a lot of questions that sounded suspiciously scripted. They want to verify elevation, inspect drainage slope, evaluate runoff mitigation. I knew damn well Karen had called them. Hell, she was probably watching from behind her curtains with binoculars and a Chardonnay. The inspectors were polite but thorough. They walked my entire property line, took photos, measured distances. I played nice, gave them the permits, showed them the stamped plans. They didn't say much, just scribbled on their little pads and told me someone would follow up. That night my phone buzzed with a group text from a few neighbors. HOA newsletter had gone out. Subject line, unauthorized private construction, a community concern. There was a picture. Blurry and zoomed in, but you could clearly see my backyard, my pool pit, and me, standing shirtless with a shovel like some outlaw hillbilly ruining suburbia. They didn't name me directly, but it might as well have been titled, "Look at what Mike Brennan is doing to your property values." I laughed, a bitter one, the kind you let out when you realize people are going to believe the headline before they ask you for the story. Jake came home from practice quiet that night, said some kid on his team told him his dad had called our pool an eyesore and that the HOA was cracking down. Tina tried to reassure him, but I could see the concern in her face. Not fear, not yet, just that tight, silent worry moms get when the ground starts shifting under the house. Then came the complaints, trash accidentally tossed over our fence. random bags of dog poop left in our driveway. One morning, we woke up to a letter, folded and shoved into our mailbox without postage. No name. Just blocky, angry Sharpie. "You're making the neighborhood ugly. Stop!" I kept digging, kept working, tried to brush it off, told myself this was just Karen making noise, trying to shake the tree, hoping something would fall out. But then she upped the game. Another HOA meeting was suddenly scheduled. Unannounced, unposted, just a folded flyer stuck under a few doormats. Only the folks she knew would show up and vote her way. The agenda? Community landscaping concerns and unauthorized modifications. I showed up anyway. Sat right in the front row with mud on my boots and dirt under my nails. Watched her run the meeting like a damn cult leader. She introduced a motion, right there, with a straight face, to pass a new amendment requiring HOA approval for all permanent ground modifications exceeding 100 square feet. And guess what? The pool was just over that. Jessica Crowley, one of the board members who usually just nodded along, actually hesitated. She said something like, "Shouldn't we talk about this more? Shouldn't we wait until the full board is present?" Karen shut her down fast. "We have quorum," she said with a little smile, "and if we don't act now, we'll set a precedent." It passed, 3 votes to 1. They backdated the effective date, made it retroactive. Now, my perfectly legal pool project, technically illegal. The next morning, I had another letter taped to my door. This one, a notice of violation. They'd calculated a fine, daily, said if I didn't halt work, I'd owe over $2,000 within 2 weeks. I felt something crack in me. Not anger, not yet, just disbelief. I stood in that backyard and looked at the half-formed shell of what was supposed to be a dream for my kid, and all I could think was, how the hell did this turn into a battlefield? And still, I tried to play it straight. I called Karen, calmly, told her this wasn't how the HOA was supposed to work, that she was violating procedures, acting without full votes, manipulating rules. You know what she said? She said, "Mike, you should have just used the community pool like everyone else. You're not special." That was it. That was the moment something cold settled in my chest. Because this wasn't about rules anymore. This was personal. And she had no idea what I was willing to do when someone threatened my family. At first, I still believed we could fix it. I mean, yeah, I was pissed. But I wasn't stupid. I've been running a business for over a decade. I know when to swing a hammer and when to make a phone call. So I tried the phone call route. I started with Karen. Figured maybe if I came to her like a reasonable adult, she'd drop the power trip for a second and just talk. I left her a voicemail explaining I had my permits, that the bylaws didn't prohibit what I was doing, and that I was more than willing to meet halfway. Maybe a privacy screen, some landscaping around the pool, something to ease her mind if it really was a visual harmony thing. She never called back, but I did get another letter, this one accusing me of inappropriate and coercive contact with HOA leadership. It was so absurd I actually laughed when I read it. Then I realized she was copying everything to some legal counsel she'd hired using HOA funds, which meant this wasn't just going to be annoying anymore. This was going to cost money. So I took a breath and called Levinson. Now, Levinson's not some slick lawyer with a pocket square and a motivational podcast. He's a civil guy, kinda talks like Jeff Goldblum if he were raised in Jersey, but he's smart, careful, and he knows the HOA game better than most because he used to live under one and got dragged into a whole war over his mailbox design back in the day. He looked over everything, my permits, the HOA's letters, their supposed amendment. He shook his head and said, "Yeah, this smells like bullshit, but it's polished bullshit. It'll take some scrubbing." He drafted a formal letter demanding a cease on fines and a review of the so-called rule change. He cited procedural violations, lack of proper notice, the backdating, and a lovely bit about selective enforcement, since Karen's own hot tub didn't have a lick of paperwork on file. He sent it to the HOA's listed address, certified mail. Karen responded by doubling the daily fine and sending me a bill for legal review costs incurred by the HOA. That was new. They were trying to make me pay for the lawyer they hired against me. So I went up the ladder, filed a complaint with the city's code compliance office, this time against the HOA. I attached everything, letters, pictures, even a video of Karen at the meeting steamrolling the vote like a one-woman kangaroo court. I waited 2 weeks, got a reply saying the city doesn't get involved in civil neighborhood association matters. Next stop, the State Attorney General's office. There's a division that handles HOA abuse, so I gave them the whole rundown. Their reply? Due to volume, we're unable to investigate individual claims at this time. At this point, I felt like I was shouting into the wind. Tina saw it in me. I'd come home from work and just stare out at the unfinished pool, wondering if I should just rip it all out and lay sod over the dream. Jake had stopped asking when it would be done. He barely looked at it anymore. Every time I saw him dragging his duffel bag into practice, knowing he hadn't had a decent place to train in weeks, it just killed me. And the neighbors? They weren't all Karen clones, but they sure weren't lining up to help either. Most just avoided eye contact. A couple nodded politely, maybe even whispered, "Hang in there," but nobody was stepping in. Fear. That's what it was. Karen had them scared. Don, my neighbor, was one of the few who stood firm. Brought me beer, cracked dumb jokes, told me I should spike the HOA's lemonade with laxatives at the next meeting. I appreciated it. But jokes don't pour concrete. Even Jessica, the board member who'd hesitated during the amendment vote, stopped returning my calls. I cornered her once outside her garage, and she looked genuinely uncomfortable. She whispered, "I don't agree with what's happening, Mike." "But you don't understand. Karen documents things. She threatens people. She keeps records." Then she shut the garage door like I was the one breaking rules. I tried one last thing. Sat down with Jake, just the two of us, and asked if he wanted to keep going. If it wasn't important to him anymore, I was ready to stop. Maybe rent some extra time at a pool across town. Maybe just let this dream go and save ourselves the stress. He didn't say anything right away, just stared at his cereal like it had the answer. Then he looked up and said, real quiet, "I don't want them to win." And that was it. I'd tried everything. I followed the rules, I got the permits, I stayed civil, I took the high road until it turned into a goddamn cliff, and I had nothing to show for it but bills, stress, and a half-dug hole. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done hoping people would do the right thing. Something had to change. Something was going to change. I just didn't know how yet. I wasn't expecting much that morning. Honestly, I'd gotten used to disappointment arriving in the form of certified envelopes and HOA newsletters. So when I opened the mailbox and saw a beat-up manila envelope with no return address, my first thought was, great, now we've graduated to ransom notes. But this wasn't hate mail? Inside was a thick packet of documents bound with a red rubber band. No note, no cover letter, just a sticky tab on the front page that read, Article 6, Historical Deed Protections. At first I didn't get it. Looked like dry legal crap from 30 years ago. Declarations, amendments, scanned PDFs with crooked margins. But then I noticed the letterhead, Hollow Glen Community Charter, 1998. That was the original incorporation date of our HOA. I'd seen parts of this before in the public records when I first moved in, but this was the full deal, the uncut version. And on page 23, under Individual Property Rights, there it was in bold. Private recreational structures, including pools, spas, and athletic installations, shall not be restricted by the association provided they remain within backyard boundaries, do not exceed 6 feet above ground level, and are not visible from the street. My jaw just sort of dropped. I read it again. And again. And then I ran inside and spread everything out on the kitchen table like it was a treasure map. Tina stared at me like I'd lost it. I told her, they've been lying. Karen's been bluffing this whole time. And then it hit me. If this clause still stood, it overrode anything they had passed after, unless those changes had been made legally, with full member votes and public posting. Karen's backdated amendment? That crap wouldn't hold up if this charter clause was still active. But that wasn't even the wild part. At the back of the packet, tucked behind a faded copy of the original signatures, was a second sticky tab. This one said, See Karen Whitmore, Violation 2007. I froze. It was a scanned copy of a formal complaint filed against Karen. Back when she wasn't the president, someone had reported her for installing a luxury hot tub enclosure without seeking board approval. The file included photos, a letter from her neighbor at the time, and even a copy of a notice of violation. But the kicker? The board had voted not to pursue enforcement, stating she had submitted paperwork after the fact and that no permanent harm or aesthetic disruption had occurred. They let it slide, just like that. So let me get this straight. She'd done exactly what I did. Broke ground, built something, and filed paperwork later. But because she was chummy with the board, it got swept under the rug. And now, years later, she's weaponizing the same rules against me? It didn't make sense. I sat back and just stared at the table, at this mess of paper, half of it yellowed and brittle, half of it sharp and angry. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel hopeless. I felt armed. Whoever left that envelope knew exactly what they were doing. This wasn't some random act of kindness, it was a play, a move in a game I hadn't even realized I was playing. And I had a pretty good idea who it was. Eric Summers. He used to be on the HOA board. Quiet guy, always looked like he was watching everything 2 steps ahead. He'd resigned about a year before my pool drama started, said he was tired of the internal politics. I'd run into him a couple times since, mostly while walking the dog, never said much more than a polite nod. But I remembered the look he gave me one day after Karen had sent out that first violation letter. It wasn't pity, it was recognition. I found his number in the old neighborhood directory, called. He answered like he'd been waiting for it. All he said was, "Took you long enough." We met up later that evening in his garage. The guy had boxes of HOA archives, newsletters, minutes, complaint logs, email printouts. Apparently he'd kept everything from his time on the board just in case. In case of what? I asked. In case someone like Karen forgot she wasn't queen, he said. That's when I realized this was bigger than me. Karen had been running the HOA like her own little regime for years, changing rules quietly, suppressing votes, ignoring procedures. And most folks, they just went along, too busy with their own lives to fight back, or too scared. But now? Now I had the original documents. I had proof she violated the same rules she was using to crucify me, and I had someone who'd been on the inside. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe, like I could actually win. Not just survive the fines or get a temporary injunction, but fully, publicly shut this whole circus down. Eric looked at me across his cluttered garage and said, "You're not the first person she's done this to, but you could be the last." And that was the moment something inside me clicked. I wasn't just some guy with a shovel anymore. Now I had ammo. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was stressed, but because my brain wouldn't stop moving. For the first time in weeks, my thoughts weren't running in circles. They had direction. Like someone finally turned the lights on and pointed to a real exit. I sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, 3 cups of coffee, and that envelope full of HOA skeletons spread out around me like a war map. Tina came in at some point, half awake, looked at the mess, and just said, "Is this what a nervous breakdown looks like, or are we getting somewhere?" I kissed her on the cheek and said, "This is me getting somewhere." Eric had told me to take it slow, smart. "You're not just building a pool anymore, Mike," he said. "You're burning down a system." The plan started small. First, I needed to verify everything, double-check every single clause in that original charter. So I brought the whole packet to Levinson. He cleared his afternoon, put on his readers, and dove in like it was a crossword puzzle he'd been dying to crack. A couple hours later, he leaned back and said, "Okay, not only is this real, but if what you're telling me about the new amendment is true, it's unenforceable. No vote quorum, no public posting, no certified delivery. Hell, there isn't even a timestamp. It's smoke." That's what I needed to hear. So we drafted a formal response, not just another letter, a certified legal challenge to the HOA amendment, citing the original community charter, procedural violations, and, my favorite part, selective enforcement, backed by the hot tub scandal of 2007. We attached the complaint from Karen's file, photos of her backyard setup, and a notarized statement from Eric confirming it was never approved through a board vote, and then we didn't send it. Not yet. Because this wasn't just about winning the fight in court, this was about flipping the script. See, Karen had built her kingdom on silence, on the idea that people were too tired or scared or uninterested to dig deep or speak up. So before I dropped the hammer legally, I wanted to make sure everyone was watching. I started small, social media, just a photo of my half-finished pool, the HOA letter taped to my gate, and a caption that said, "They told me I couldn't build a backyard pool because we already have one." Turns out they lied, and I've got the receipts. Then I made a little post in the neighborhood Facebook group. Not angry, not ranty, just laid out the facts. Said I had documents that proved Karen was blocking my pool illegally, that she'd done the same thing herself, and that the original community charter protected homeowners like me. I didn't name-call or threaten, just asked. If they're doing this to me, who else are they doing it to? It spread faster than I expected. People started commenting, sharing their own frustrations, fines for flower pots, warnings for holiday lights, letters about excessive noise from kids playing basketball in their driveways. And just like that, the narrative shifted. I wasn't the troublemaker anymore. I was the guy standing up. A couple neighbors reached out privately, said they had emails, documents, letters from Karen that didn't sit right. One of them, Margaret, sweet lady down the block, sent me an email thread from 2 years ago where Karen threatened to tow her car for being visually disruptive. The car was a Prius. Another guy named Andre told me he'd once been fined for painting his garage door the wrong shade of white. Not white, just the wrong shade. I started collecting everything. Levinson and I built a case file like it was a damn Netflix documentary, and the more we gathered, the clearer the picture got. Karen had been using the HOA as her personal enforcement squad, rewriting rules, suppressing votes, ignoring protocol, and nobody stopped her because nobody ever had the proof. Now we did. Next step was to get it in front of the people who mattered. Not just the board, everyone, the homeowners, the people she'd bullied into silence. So I called a vote. Yeah, turns out the HOA charter actually allows any homeowner to call a special meeting if they get signatures from at least 25% of the residents. Most folks had no clue that clause even existed. Tina and I walked door to door for a week straight, Jake helping after school. We didn't guilt anyone, didn't yell. We just showed people what we had. The charter, the photos, the complaints, the fine breakdowns, the amendment with no vote record. Almost everyone signed, even the ones who'd kept their heads down for years. You could see it in their eyes. Something was cracking. Hope, maybe. Don, my neighbor, said it best when he signed. About damn time someone kicked the anthill. We turned in the signatures, officially scheduled a special homeowners meeting, not a Karen meeting, a real one. Levinson helped me write the formal agenda. It was boring on purpose. Just 2 points. 1. Review of HOA enforcement practices and policy changes. Second motion for board re-election. That was it. Simple, legal, and packed with a whole lot of dynamite. The final piece? I sent Karen one last letter, certified with delivery confirmation. It said, "Please be advised, I will not be filling in my pool. See you at the meeting." And then I sat back and waited, not like a guy hoping it would all blow over, but like a man who finally knew what came next. Karen didn't waste time. Less than 48 hours after I filed for the special meeting, she came out, swinging. It started with a new letter. This one looked real official. HOA letterhead. Typed signature, little watermark of a tree that I'd never seen before. At first glance, it looked like some harmless policy update. But buried in the third paragraph, there it was. A claim that the HOA had entered into an arrangement with legal counsel to initiate potential civil action against parties in willful violation of association code. Which, of course, meant me. She was threatening to sue. Not directly, not in plain English. But the language was clear enough. Liability, damages, nuisance impact, all the buzzwords that scream lawyer up or bend over. And then came the big swing. She had the nerve to publish a community impact bulletin mailed to every single home in the neighborhood. Full-color printing, no less. It basically painted me as some renegade homeowner jeopardizing the community's property values, draining HOA resources, and, my personal favorite, fomenting unrest. Like I was staging a rebellion in the middle of the cul-de-sac. And I'll be honest with you, for a minute there, I panicked. Not because I thought she had a leg to stand on legally, we'd already poked 100 holes in her story, but because perception matters, especially out here in suburbia. One printed flyer in the wrong mailboxes can undo weeks of momentum. But something weird happened. The calls didn't stop, the messages didn't stop. People still thanked me, still asked when the meeting would be. One guy, an old-timer who'd lived here since the HOA was formed, said, "Don't let that woman scare you. She tried the same crap when I painted my porch red, told me it was psychologically aggressive." So I stayed the course. Until I got a letter from the city. This one was real. It said there had been an anonymous report filed about unauthorized work on my property. Not just about the pool, but about grading, soil stability, possible environmental runoff violations. I read it once, twice, 3 times. Karen had actually gone to the city with a complaint that I was endangering the neighborhood with my construction, claimed my pool was causing water seepage into adjacent properties. Never mind the fact that I hadn't even poured concrete yet. She was trying to bury me in red tape. If she couldn't win the fight in the HOA arena, she'd move it to City Hall. Levinson wasn't surprised. He said this kind of strategy was common in HOA wars. It's about exhaustion, he told me. They throw enough paperwork, enough deadlines, enough implied threats, and most people fold. And I'll admit it, the weight of it all started creeping in. Between the bills, the lawyer calls, the city notices, the meetings, I felt like I was living inside a paper shredder. But then something changed. I got a knock at the door. It was Jessica, the same Jessica from the board who had gone radio silent. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept well in weeks. She stepped inside like she was afraid of being seen, and she handed me something, a USB drive. She said, "I'm done protecting her." Then she left. No explanation, just that. I sat down and opened the files. It was audio, recordings. Jessica had been recording HOA meetings, real meetings, the ones that didn't get published in the minutes, the ones that weren't even acknowledged to exist. There was Karen, clear as day, talking about how to strategically rewrite bylaws, how to bury non-compliant homeowners in procedural action. There was a clip of her admitting she never notified the board about my pool until after she'd mailed the violation, and one where she laughed and said, "If we hit him with enough legal-sounding language, he'll give up. They always do." It made my blood go cold, not just because of the arrogance, but because I knew what this meant. She'd gone too far. I called Levinson, sent him the audio. He practically cackled. "You don't just have a case now," he said. "You have a damn sledgehammer." Still, we had to move carefully. Karen wasn't going down without a fight. Sure enough, a few days later, she had her lawyer send me a cease and desist for defamation after my Facebook post, claimed I'd caused emotional distress to her and her family, said I was spreading misinformation that endangered her safety. It was so over the top it almost read like satire. But it didn't matter. She was trying to scare me back into my hole. Classic Karen move, make enough noise and hope people stop asking questions. But I didn't stop. I went back on Facebook, I posted another update, just a short paragraph. The HOA board president has threatened to sue me for telling the truth, but now I have audio recordings of her, in her own words, confirming everything I said. If she wants a fight, she's going to get one, and I'm not backing down. People lost their minds. Comments exploded. Private messages came in faster than I could read them. Folks were furious, not just for me, but for themselves. Turns out Karen had a lot of enemies, and suddenly I wasn't alone anymore. Andre offered to help with flyers for the meeting. Margaret printed signs. Don organized a group of retired vets to stand with me at the meeting just for presence. Jake even offered to speak, which nearly broke me. My kid standing up for his dad. I said no, this was my mess to fix, but the fact that he offered, that lit a fire in me I didn't know I still had. We were rolling now. Karen could swing every hammer she had, but the walls were starting to crack. She just didn't realize it yet. The night of the meeting, you could feel the tension in the air before you even walked through the clubhouse doors. People weren't showing up in their usual HOA mode, half interested, quietly resentful, there for the cookie tray. No, this was different. Folks were standing in clusters outside the building, talking low, eyes scanning every face that passed, like it was a protest and a poker game at the same time. I showed up with Tina and Jake on either side of me and Don right behind us, arms crossed, wearing a navy ball cap like he was about to testify before Congress. Jessica was already there, seated near the front, fiddling nervously with a stack of papers. When she saw me walk in, she gave a small nod. Karen walked in 10 minutes late, of course, wearing a blazer so stiff it looked like body armor. She tried to sweep through the room like she always did, head high, fake smile, but the vibe had changed. People didn't part for her this time, they watched her. She called the meeting to order with that same sugary voice she always used, like this was just another night of community engagement. But even as she smiled, her hands were fidgeting. You could see it. Her usual confidence, it was leaking. She started the agenda with some rambling about neighborhood maintenance and trash collection issues, probably hoping to keep things tame, hoping no one would bring up the elephant stomping through her tidy list of bullet points. But when she tried to move on without acknowledging the second agenda item, the review of HOA enforcement practices and board accountability, I stood up. I didn't yell, I didn't storm, I just said loud and clear, "Point 2, Karen, you skipped it." A few other people nodded. A few said, "Yeah." And suddenly, she didn't have control of the room anymore. I walked to the front and handed out printed packets to every homeowner in that room. Tina helped. Jake passed out pens. Don stood by the door and made sure nobody accidentally walked off with a whole stack. The packets had everything. Copies of the original charter, Karen's backdated amendment, photos of her hot tub, audio transcript excerpts, the cease and desist she sent me, quotes from the original bylaws that explicitly protected my right to build the damn pool. And then I played the recording. Not the whole thing, just a clean, damning clip. Karen's voice clear as day. "If we hit him with enough legal-sounding language, he'll give up. They always do." You could hear the air leave the room. No one spoke for a few seconds. Just silence and some paper rustling as people double-checked what they just heard. Karen didn't move. Her smile was frozen in place, like she was still trying to remember what chapter of the HOA handbook covered this scenario. I looked out at everyone and said, "I followed every rule. I got every permit. I played by the book. And this board, this person, weaponized the system to make me stop. Not because it broke the rules, but because it broke her illusion of control." That's when Jessica stood up. She cleared her throat, looked right at Karen, and said, "I have more recordings. And emails. From multiple incidents. I'm turning them over to the homeowners and the state HOA Oversight Board." The room turned into a wave of murmurs, gasps, and a few audible "oh damns." Karen tried to speak. Finally. She opened her mouth and said something about taken out of context and community integrity, but it didn't land. Not anymore. Andre, the garage door guy, raised his hand. I motioned to vote for the immediate suspension and re-election of the board. Someone else shouted, "Seconded." And just like that, it happened. Right there, in the same room where Karen had once called the shots like a neighborhood dictator, she was voted out. The majority, hell, it was basically everyone, voted in favor. Her voice cracked as she tried to argue procedure, but Jessica calmly handed her a copy of the charter and pointed to the clause she herself had helped write years ago. It allowed for emergency board restructuring by majority vote in cases of abuse of power. She knew she was done. She didn't even wait for the final count. Just gathered her binder, muttered something about legal consequences, and left. People clapped when the door shut behind her. Not a celebration, really. More like a release, like the pressure valve had finally been cranked open and everyone could breathe again. We stayed late that night, finalizing new board nominations. Jessica was voted in as interim president. Andre volunteered. Margaret from down the block. Even Don got a write-in vote, but he waved it off and said, "I'd rather fight pirates." Someone brought cookies. Jake came up behind me and handed me one, then said, "So, does this mean we finished the pool?" I looked around at the people in that room, the same neighbors who once looked the other way, now standing shoulder to shoulder, and I smiled. "Yeah, kid," I said, "we finished the pool. And this time, nobody's stopping us. The pool's finished now. Concrete's cured, tiles are down, the water's clean enough to drink if you're into that kind of thing." Jake did his first full training lap the same day we turned on the pump. He popped up at the far end, grinning like a maniac, water dripping from his hair, and said, "This is better than the school's pool." And just like that, it was worth it. Every letter, every sleepless night, every smug look from Karen, every damn bag of dog poop someone flung over the fence, all of it. I still get this funny feeling when I walk out to the backyard. It's peaceful now. But for a while, that space wasn't a yard. It was a battleground, a legal minefield, a psychological tug-of-war, a front line where dreams and bureaucracy went 12 rounds. Now it's just quiet. Sometimes I sit out there early before anyone else is up, with a cup of coffee and my feet in the shallow end, and I think about how close I came to giving up. How many times I looked at that hole in the ground and thought, maybe she's right, maybe it's not worth it. But that's the thing about people like Karen. They don't come at you with knives, they come with paper cuts, dozens of little jabs that wear you down just enough so you fold politely and walk away without a fight. And if you don't stop them, they don't stop. I didn't fight because I'm brave or stubborn or some kind of rebel. I fought because I had to. Because at some point, it stopped being about a pool and started being about something bigger. About not letting someone twist a system that's supposed to protect people into something that only serves them. About showing my kid that standing up matters. Karen still lives here, believe it or not. She's quiet now, keeps to herself. Word is she tried to run for a local community committee and didn't get a single vote. Not even her own husband backed her. He voted for Margaret. Funny how things come full circle. Jessica's doing a good job as president. She's no saint, but she's fair. And she listens. The HOA is a little more boring these days, which is exactly how it should be. They're focused on trimming hedges and replacing broken mailboxes. You know, actual neighborhood stuff. Don still drops by with beers on the weekends. We don't talk about the war much. Sometimes we just sit by the pool, watch Jake do his laps, and crack jokes about how we should charge the HOA for community use. Tina says I should write a book. I told her I'd settle for a few months without drama and a clean filter system. Jake's coach came by last week, watched him swim for a while, scribbled something in a notebook, then pulled me aside and said, "He's got a real shot, Mike, a real one." I didn't say anything right away, just looked out at my kid slicing through the water like he was built for it, and I felt something deep in my chest, not pride, not relief, just peace. That's what this all led to. Not victory, not revenge, just peace. And a hell of a nice backyard.